So today we are going to be talking about the climax of the story. Now today we're lacking a whiteboard, as you can all obviously see. So just bear with me. I'm going to do my best to remind you guys about what we're talking about and say it up front so that way it doesn't get confusing, because I know we usually write it up on the board, but unfortunately we do not have them today. Please do not forget, the 30th of November is when all entries for the first chapter contest are due. If you do not have an entry form, please come pick an entry form up. It has the rules and stipulations, and if you're extra interested, go to the front desk and ask for a grading sheet. Sorry, my nose itches. Because we actually do have judge grading sheets there. You will not be able to judge the stories, but you can take the grading sheet if you're curious what we will be judging on to make sure that it is as nice, beautiful as you'd like it to be. However, the entry form is the only thing that's required, so please make sure to pick up an entry form and submit. Again, the deadline is November 30th, so you gotta get it in before the 30th. We will be closed for Thanksgiving. The Friday following Thanksgiving Day and the Saturday following Thanksgiving Day. So there's very minimal amount of finite days that you can turn this story in. Please make sure to get it there before the 30th though, because the 30th we cut off submission 15 minutes before closing, unless you specifically call ahead and tell us that you're coming. In which case we will make sure that you get in. That being said, I would love to see entries in the first chapter contest from all of you guys. It would be absolutely fantastic. I've only had a couple entries so far, so I would love to see some more. Again, it's just a first chapter, no other prompt than that. It's just how much of a punch does your first chapter pack? How much of that drama, that action, that beautiful hook that we talked about in that first writing one that we did a bit back on writing the beginning and the inciting incident, how much of that can you pack into the story that really makes me want to read more? The goal of this first chapter contest is write a first chapter that makes me and my coworkers want to read more. Now, I can edit your story for you, your first chapter for you. However, if I do, that means I cannot judge it. My coworkers will be judging it. But on the plus side, it will be edited, so keep that in mind. If you want me to edit it, you have to make sure to get it in to me before the 25th. That's 5 days from now. Well, 5 days from it being posted. If you don't get it to me by the 25th, I will not have enough time to edit all the entries. Alright, now getting on to the lesson. Tips for writing a climax in a story. The climax of a novel is completely the most pivotal part. People don't realize that maybe, or people realize it too much and they're like, hey, I have to have my climax be perfect, and they obsess over it to the point where they don't finish the book. You don't want either. You don't want to completely have your climax be a letdown because you're just like, oh, the climax is whatever. Or you, alternatively, don't want to have people think that you have overbuilt your climax to the point where you're like, what? All this crazy stuff is happening. It's too much drama all at once. There's a fine line between both of those. Now, the main thing that you're going to want to make sure it does is it answers the major question that you had from the beginning of your novel. Remember when we talked about the inciting incident, how it sets up the major question for the rest of your novel? Now the climax has to resolve or answer that question from the beginning of the novel. So, and you can have a climax of a series be different than the climax of a novel. So for example, Harry Potter, and I'm just going to go with Harry Potter because everyone generally knows Harry Potter by now. The first book, you have the inciting incident, which is, some people argue which it is, but I would probably say Harry receiving the letter. After Harry receives that letter, he has no idea who he is or what's happening, right? And he, by the end of the climax, finally has a lot of those questions answered. Not only does he meet Voldemort, but he gets to help have some sense of defeat of Voldemort, and Voldemort gets to talk about how his parents died. As a result, you're answering all those questions that were at the beginning. But is this the end of Voldemort? Absolutely not. This is, in some ways, the inciting incident for the rest of this series, setting up this perpetual battle with Voldemort, trying to make sure that his oppressive reign does not continue. So you're going to want to make sure you have, if you're doing a series, that you plan out where the series climax is going to be versus the novel climax, because you are going to want to make sure that your novel climax still packs a punch, even if it's not as much of a punch as obviously the climax of your novel, because you want to build from climax of one book to climax of all the books. Now, the next thing that you're going to want to pay attention to is reader expectation. Believe it or not, reader expectation actually plays a huge role in how you're going to write your climax. Now, with a climax, you often, like I said, want to answer a major question from the beginning of the novel, or a promise. One second. Hello, good to see you guys. I already started the video just because I wasn't sure who was coming, but feel free to sit down.
This is Georgia.
All right.
She's my sister.
Lovely to meet you. That is okay. I mean, hey, every once in a while we have people who come once and then people who come all the time. It's okay. Everyone has their own different schedule. That's why I do the videos I do. So today we are talking about writing the climax of your novel and the things you can do to help get it right. So first you want to help answer the major question that you have at the beginning of the novel. So typically it's something like, who is doing all these bad things? And then you discover the villain and defeat them. Or the question is, who is the murderer, if it's a murder mystery? Or all these various different things. The next thing you want to make sure, just to recap on that, is reader expectation. The best way to make sure that the readers are satisfied, because that's what you want, is to make sure that you follow your genre expectations. Now, I know this sounds like I'm telling you, oh, follow tropes, follow cliches. Absolutely not. I'm not talking about whoa, spinners in there. Tropes and cliches. I'm talking about making sure that the expectation for the novel is fulfilled. Believe it or not, people have a lot of expectations when they go into a novel, knowing its genre. For example, we actually have a lot of books in the library here that are in the romance section that people think should be in fiction, or in fiction that are, or that should be in the romance section that are in fiction. And as a librarian, I can tell you why they are there. But as a reader, sometimes it gets confusing, especially if there's this heavy, heavy subplot. So for example, some of the ones that are in fiction, the main plot is something more fictional. You know, they're just trying to have a better family life, or something like that. Whereas the subplot is romance, but people determine it as romance because of the fact that the subplot is such a major part of the story, or vice versa. Sometimes it gets pegged as romance and people are like, that's not a romance novel, and it's like, well, romance is technically the main plot, but yes, they are also solving a murder on the side. And so as a result, people tend to get their genres all muddled. Is that okay? Yes, it absolutely is, because there is going to be some uniqueness for every individual plot, especially with subplots and main plots. However, reader expectation is still important to help them feel satisfied. For example, if you were reading a murder mystery novel, and at the end of the murder mystery novel, instead of solving the murder, the two characters fell in love, got married, and never cared about the murderer again, you'd be disappointed, right? You'd be like, what the heck did I just read? Why did I bother? That would not be an appropriate climax for the novel. If that was a romance novel with a murderer on the side, maybe. I would still say solid maybe. You gotta make sure that your subplot and your main plot are both resolved by the end of the climax. And you want to do that in that order. So for example, if it is a romance with a murder mystery on the side, you want to make sure that they get together and then they use their love to conquer all and find the murderer. Or if it's the reverse and it's a murder mystery with a subplot of romance, maybe they solve the murder and in the process of solving the murder, they realize how much they love each other. It's important to make sure that your main plot and your subplot don't get tangled up. It's important that they rely on each other, absolutely, because that's what a subplot and main plot do. However, it is important to make sure that your subplot doesn't eat your main plot, because then you get things like that where, like I said, you have a murder mystery that all of a sudden they don't care about the murder anymore because they're in love. And you're like, wait, stop, hold on. Yes?
Does your plot always have to match your... So, are you saying that plot determines genre?
So, funnily enough, yes, plot does determine genre. Especially for librarians and for marketers and publishers. And unfortunately, those are the big three things that you're worried about as an author. As an author, you want to make sure your publisher understands, you want to make sure that your marketer understands, and you want to make sure that the basic librarians who are going to be taking up your stuff understand. Because if a librarian, a marketer, and a publisher are all confused about which genre you're in, it's going to be a whole heck of a lot harder to publish. However, if your plot is very much distinctly a certain kind of plot, now again, I'm not saying you have to follow certain tropes or cliches or anything like that. It's just more a matter of reader expectation. If you're doing a romance, you want them to get together at the end. If you're doing a tragedy, you want them to both die at the end. If you're doing a fantasy, if you're doing a middle fiction fantasy, you want them to have them defeat the villain. If you're doing a dark fantasy, maybe you have them die in the end. You want to make sure that your plot and genre match up. Now, this is where it gets tricky, actually. I've had a lot of independently published authors, because I've talked about both traditional and indie, come to me and say, hey, what genre is my book? And this is where it gets tricky. Because I actually had someone who came up to me and was like, I never thought about romance as a plot for my novel. And I'm sitting here going like, it's pretty much the main plot, hun. Like, if you weren't meaning it to be a romance novel, we need to reevaluate how you wrote this, because it is completely a romance novel. Sure, it ends in tragedy, so it's a tragic romance novel, but it is absolutely a romance novel. It would be like saying Romeo and Juliet is not a romance. It's a tragic romance, but it's still a romance. So it's important to make sure that your plot is clear. If you're trying to write a murder mystery, make sure it feels like a murder mystery, is basically what I'm trying to say. You don't need to think of your genre beforehand, but if you do know your genre beforehand, maybe do some research into what your readers expect with that type of genre. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Other question?
I mean, it's not exactly a question, but
That's okay.
it's more of a comment,
Go ahead.
kind of question. It should-
Comment, question, somewhere between.
Right. I know that there's a lot of plots that don't exactly have a genre.
Okay, give an example.
So, for example, I guess it depends on how you classify genres. But
No, that's okay.
for example, Brandon Sanderson classified Mistborn under apprentice and whatever, or apprentice and
So that
master.
is the theme, not a genre, actually. That's the funny thing about themes and genres. You can have multiple themes for your novel. Genre is your basic overarching thing. So for example, we classify it as fantasy.
Oh, okay.
So when I'm talking genre, I'm talking big overarching things. Themes, you can absolutely do whatever the heck you want with themes. And they can be weird and not quite make sense, like you said with that. I agree. That is kind of one of those ones where you're like, oh, I guess I could see that. It's quirky, but it's not quite what I would imagine. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So themes are absolutely flexible. Themes, you can have as many themes as crazily as you want in your book, as long as they're decently clear. The main thing that you're going to worry about with genre is just the fact that if someone picks up a fantasy novel, and then in the middle of your fantasy novel, you have a sci-fi alien burst out of the room and destroy everyone with a space gun, you're going to have a lot of disappointed readers. Does that make more sense? Okay. So I agree. Themes are actually far trickier than overarching genres, I would agree. Again, if you don't know your genre, don't worry about it. Write the novel, figure out the genre later. But if you do know your genre ahead of time, maybe take some time to research into it and look into it. But I would say just write your story the way you feel it needs to be written. Evaluate those types of expectations later. Okay? All right. The reason it's important, though, is simply because you don't want to, again, take those left turns where it feels like it came out of nowhere. All right, the next point is it completes the character growth arc. So kind of like what you were saying with master and apprentice themes. If you have master and apprentice themes in your novel, you want to make sure that, you know, the classic, the apprentice becomes the master kind of thing. You know, they eventually learn what they're doing. They eventually stop failing quite so much. They still fail because they're human, but they eventually stop failing quite that badly. Because generally when they're an apprentice, it's like, ah, crap, I tripped and my gun went off and I almost killed someone, you know. Whereas when you're a master, it's a little bit more like, oh no, I made a bad call and now everyone's in danger, you know. Different failures, but you see that growth. You see them going from this stumbling, bumbling buffoon of an apprentice to going to this master that is 90% effective, and that they feel very good with what they're doing and what they're feeling, and they feel confident in what they're doing, even if not completely. So it's important to make sure you include that character growth arc in your climax. If it's all just action and punching and fighting and no emotional character growth, you're going to have a lot of disappointed readers because they want to see that character growth. They want them to feel like a real person. And real people change with climactic events in their life. With events that change their life, they feel different. They act differently. There is an emotional change in them, whether it be surviving a loss and they experience grief, or whether it be defeating someone who ultimately was trying to kill them this whole time, or whether it be putting a murderer in jail, like Murder Mystery Classic. Those are all going to feel different and have different emotional reactions, but you're still going to have an emotional reaction. And you want to make sure to showcase that, because if you don't, they're going to seem kind of a little psychotic. Because no one doesn't have emotions unless you have serious problems. Generally, we all have emotions, right? Even if they're subtle emotions, or even if they're big emotions. And you got to make sure you showcase that to your audience during your climax. All right. Now, the next thing you want to make sure is that the status quo from the beginning of the story should be dramatically changed. There should be a huge difference. For example, I'm going to use Harry Potter just because, in general, everyone knows the basic plot of Harry Potter, even if you haven't read or watched it. He goes from this adorable small child to being an adult who has defeated a massive villain, right? That is a dramatic change. He went from being this abused little kid to being one of the most powerful wizards in the wizarding world and defeating another powerful wizard in the wizarding world, right? And becoming ultimately an Auror for the Ministry. That's a pretty dramatic change, right? The status quo is absolutely not the same. He doesn't go back to his basement and hide and cower again and let his aunt and uncle beat him around and pretend like he's not a wizard, right? If that happened, I think we'd all be really sad. We'd all be like, bro, what happened? So it's important to make sure you show them not only the emotional character growth, but also how things have changed in the universe. If this event is truly as cataclysmic as you say it is, then things are going to change in the universe, even if it's just a murder mystery. With murder mysteries, right, sometimes you'll have a series of murder mysteries where you have, Sherlock Holmes type character solving all these mysteries. It's still going to change the status quo by the end. Because the status quo at the beginning was person is murdered and murderer is free, right? And by the end, murderer is in jail and Sherlock is won. That's different, right? So even if it's a subtle status quo change, you need to make sure you exemplify that status quo change. Any questions? Not so far? Okay, cool. I know I talk very fast, so I like to make sure that I'm not just completely blabbing my mouth and then it's like, I have no idea what you're saying. So, the next one is make sure that your ending is consistent with character and foreshadowing. Now, we talked about this a little bit last time and the time before that, but you want to make sure that your character is consistent throughout the novel. Because if you have your character who's a generally happy-go-lucky person, all of a sudden just snap at someone for no reason, that's not going to make sense. Hold on, opening the door. However, if you have a happy-go-lucky person who had their parents just die, snap at their friend for no reason, all of a sudden this makes sense. We're talking about being in or out of character.
I don't know.
It's just bad timing. But yes, so we're just talking about if you have a happy-go-lucky character and nothing has gone wrong in their life, there's no reason for them to snap at their best friend, right? But if their parents have just died and then their best friend is like, yeah, everything's fine, they're going to be like, everything's fine, A. And all of a sudden that happy-go-lucky person snapping makes more logical, emotional sense. So if you are going to have characters change emotionally, you gotta make sure that you have it in such a way that it makes logical sense. Now yes, I know we're dealing with emotions, and so a lot of people say, well, Cheyenne, we're dealing with emotions, and emotions aren't logical. Wrong. Emotions are actually very logical. Emotions can be illogical, 100%. You say things you don't mean, you explode for no reason, absolutely. However, there is generally a reason underneath
That
it.
sounds like a science fiction thing, like a Matrix type, like emotions are illogical.
No, I should record this and send this to my mom.
But see, it's funny though, because with illogical things, it feels bizarre. Because we say emotions are not logical and that logic and emotion are two different things, but that's actually not true. Your emotions have to be rooted in something, which makes it logical, even if it doesn't feel logical. For example, with anxiety. Anxiety, a lot of people consider to be illogical, right?
Call my best friend.
That's actually not true. Anxiety is incredibly logical. Why? Because your body is trying to use its fight or flight instincts that were developed literally for the purpose of helping you survive. But the problem is, these instincts have been tweaked. And so as a result of that, they've gone into overdrive, so they believe now everything is a threat. It's still very logical because it's trying to keep you alive. That's logical. Generally, trying to be kept alive is a good thing. Unless you're a psychopathic killer, but but that's a logical instinct, right? The instinct to stay alive, very logical instinct. However, it's when it goes into overdrive or something changes it that makes it feel illogical. Because for example, with me, I have some anxiety. I wouldn't say I've been officially diagnosed, but I'm almost 100% certain I have some flavors of anxiety. There will be times when I will be in the library and I will go to approach someone and I will say something. And I will seem perfectly professional and they'll think I'm professional and we'll walk away. And then later I'm like, why did I say that? I'm so stupid. What if they hate me? And that is not a logical response. However, it is logical because my brain's going, if they hate me, they could dislike me, which puts me in danger, therefore anxiety. And so my brain is doing the logical thing. I'm turning it illogical by overthinking. And that's generally what happens with emotions too. For example, you might have a moment where you tell someone, hey, I'm really cold, and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, and they're wearing a jacket. And you're sitting there going, like, I want to borrow your jacket, but I'm too awkward to say so. But then later you might think, oh, well, I'm so offended because they didn't let me borrow their jacket. Did you actually say you wanted to borrow their jacket, though? And that's where the illogical side comes in. The illogical side is when you assume you did something correctly, and so therefore you explode later, and then the person's like, whoa, why are you exploding for no reason? Well, it's not for no reason. It's because you logically, in your head, assumed, hey, I said I was cold, therefore I'm asking for your jacket, give me a jacket, right? You in your head have perfect logic over your emotions. The other person, however, doesn't understand that logic, and that's where the illogical fallacy comes into play. Emotions are actually incredibly logical. Even when it comes down to, like I said, anxiety, even depression has been known to have some roots in things where your feelings are valid. They're absolutely valid because to you the logic makes sense, even if other people wouldn't say that the logic makes sense. The reason emotions seem illogical, again, is because other people don't understand what's going on in our head. However, the unfortunate thing for you as an author, this is where it all comes back full circle, the reader knows what's going on in the character's head. So you can't have them make random illogical decisions because that doesn't make sense. We all know that our own emotions are logical to us, even if other people don't understand them. So if you have a main character that acts logically, in their opinion, having another character feel like they're illogical emotionally is perfectly realistic. But if your reader is feeling like they are being illogical, that's when it becomes a problem. That's when you know you stepped over the line of saying that it's illogical and that they just lash out for no reason. There is generally a logic to things, even when it comes to things like cycles of abuse and things like that. I don't want to generally dwell on this subject too long, but that is absolutely a logical thing in people's brains. Once again, it draws back on that anxiety where it's like, oh, if I do X, Y, and Z, then they will love me. Not necessarily, unfortunately, with abuse, but that's how the logic in the brain works, right? That being said, it's important to make sure that we know these things as a writer, because we want to make sure that when we hit that climax in the story, we don't have the character doing something totally off the wall for no reason. So for example, like we talked about last time with foreshadowing, you want to make sure that if you have someone who is, I am Captain America type, I will put them in prison before I ever kill a man, all of a sudden go around on a psycho killing spree. What? That's not, whoa. However, if they like, I don't know, kill his wife and his best friend or something, then he might go on a psycho killing spree. You know, you gotta make sure that the logic follows. Or at least you can follow the logic enough that you can stretch it. Stretching is okay, absolutely breaking their arm off and forcing them to fight with it is wrong as a writer. You generally don't want your climax to feel so forced it's like the author just ripped off the character's arm and started beating people with it. That's not okay. You want to make sure that it feels like it's actually the character's decisions and not the author manipulating them. Alright, next thing about writing a climax. You want to make sure that you do not do your climax just for the sake of action. Like we've been talking about, you want to make sure there's emotion in there. You want to make sure that you answer the major question of the story. You want to make sure that the status quo is changed. These are all crucial parts, right? And if you just have them wailing on each other and beating on each other and no emotion, that's not actually an interesting climax. You're just like, great, they're beating each other up. Why am I excited? Whereas if it's like, this guy, like I said, let's use the example, killed their wife and brother or some reason, they're a psycho murderer and they're the Sherlock Holmes type, and they finally discover them and they start beating their face in, that's gonna feel a lot more like, yeah! Like, dude! Now, I don't condone revenge, but this is some writing we're talking about.
Oh, I know. A good revenge story.
That's why I'm like, if you want to write that, that's different. Just don't do that. Anyway, but that being said, or like if you have that Captain America character where they refuse to kill someone, then you could also do the equally appropriate vengeance. They're sitting outside of the jail cell staring at them, and they're just like, "You'll be in here for life." And then they walk away, and the person's like, "I'm not done talking to you," and they're like, because you're in jail forever.
Well, that sucks. I'm done talking to you.
Exactly. You have those punchy moments. You could still have those almost revenge feeling moments where you feel like that justice has been served, depending on the character being, violent or non-violent. Now, so that's what makes action punchy, is the emotion behind it. Now, you want to make sure that the external conflict is acknowledged as well as the internal conflict. We've been focusing a lot on the internal conflict, but if it's all internal conflict and no external, exactly. That's why I'm like, it's important to focus on it. But if you focus on all the internal and none of the external, that's when you get things like the soap operas, where it's like, am I running away? That is so sad. And you're like, okay, can we get over your emotions for a minute and focus on the fact that he's dying? Call 911. There are physical problems here that we're not acknowledging.
Just call 911. Call CPS. Just call someone.
Someone, please help. Yes, no, exactly. So you want to make sure that the external and internal conflict are both acknowledged. You don't want it to just be all internal drama, bleak. You want to make sure that there's some form of external conflict that they are also dealing with and that you address that as well. But as I said in the previous, don't make sure that it's not just external and that they have no emotions. Just not. That's a problem. I mean, unless you're trying to write a villain, in which case, good, well done. Oh, thank you.
Welcome to Fun Farm.
All right. Next one is you need to make the solution difficult for the character. Feel free to drag a chair from over there. You need to make the solution difficult for a character. I actually was really impressed recently because I was working with an indie author who I was reading the novel along, and I was like, well, it's a junior fiction novel, you know, so there's some fluffy, like, it's going to all be okay Disney-ness that's going to be involved because it's a junior fiction novel, right? It's not meant for teens and adults that's dark and
Nothing
brooding.
is ever going to have a happily ever after.
But that's why I loved it so much, because even though it was a junior fiction novel, she made it, I'm not gonna try not to spoil it, but basically she made the main character make a tough call. A really tough call. And it gave me the shivers, actually. I was like, yes, oh my gosh, I thought you were gonna just like totally bust past that, do the Disney, everything's fine ending, and she
Like,
did
I
it.
can do both.
Exactly.
No, you can't because you're human.
Yes, exactly. It was literally that I can do both, and she had to realize I can't do both. And I just, still gives me chills. It was great. But you gotta make sure that solution is difficult for the character. If the climax is just like, oh, yay, we killed the goblins, woo, that's okay for a children's novel. But if you're writing for older junior fiction, teens, or adults, that is absolutely a no. You want to make sure that the solution is difficult, because in real life there are hard decisions. Okay? I mean, it's like in war. There are a lot of hard decisions made in war. There have been several people throughout wars that have made a decision that they genuinely thought would be good and solve the war that got millions of people killed. It's happened. And it's not good, and it's a bad, terrible thing, but it's part of life. You won't always have a perfect, easy solution to everything, and not everything's gonna go perfectly all the time. I hate to go dark there, but it's frank if you're gonna write
Just take
real
a
life.
look at life. It's like it's 80% negative stuff.
It really is, and it's how we deal with the negative that makes the story so powerful, right?
Yeah.
It's not about, there is no negative, it's about how do we cope with it in spite of all this negativity.
I go with it by stabbing them.
And that's how you show your character. That's how you show how they deal with life. So you gotta make the solution difficult. Whatever your climax is, make sure that it isn't your fancy little Disney ending, unless you are writing a children's book, in which case, by all means. Because unfortunately, for any authors who want to do grim fairy tales, that is no longer acceptable for children.
What? I
So
would tell already good ones. Like Peter Pan. I love Peter
Peter
Pan.
Pan is awesome.
It's just so good.
Alright, I agree. Anyway, so, plot twists. Now let's address this, because climax is often where you put in the plot twist, right? You're all ready, you set it up, you got this, and then you're completely confused the reader.
Plot twist and
Ouch. That's not actually good. What you want to do with plot twist is you want to surprise the reader, but not confuse them. Surprise is good. When the reader goes, ooh, cool, that's positive. When the reader goes, what? That's not good.
oh, that's unenraged. What, like the
Yes,
like,
if it's
like
the
just
enraged
like
one.
cliffhanger or a plot twist that they didn't like, but also
Yes,
like
just-
respectable storytelling.
Exactly. If it's the kind of what where it's like, gasp, what? That's good. But if you're going like, what? Like, where the heck did that come from? That's when it becomes a problem. So, for example, we were talking earlier about the fact that it's important to know what genre you're in. And the reason why is because you want to make sure you don't have any plot twists that are totally insane. So, for example, a good example of a plot twist that you're like, ooh, this is surprising, but then it doesn't make any sense. Murder mystery. And you're like, it's a murder mystery, it's a murder mystery. And then all of a sudden it's like, the murderer turns out to be her lover, but instead of rejecting him, she falls in love and they both go on a psycho killing spree. You're like, what? That's where you're like, pardon? Exactly. But that made sense with him because of the fact that they foreshadowed that it was going to happen, right? If they had not foreshadowed that at all, you'd be like, what am I watching/reading, right? Whereas if you foreshadow that, it perfectly makes sense, right? With Harlequin and Joker, that's a great example. Harlequin and Joker are absolutely both psychotic people, but that's what makes it make sense, is the fact that, yes, she was sane, but she so desperately wanted to fix him that she was willing to go insane to do so. And that's where you go, like, gives you the shivers surprise, because even though you're surprised that she goes this far, at the same time it makes sense. that she goes this far. You're not just going like perfectly logical, like let's say it was Superwoman. Perfectly logical Superwoman turns into psycho killer.
Drugs.
Just, pardon? That doesn't make sense. So you need to make sure that you surprise the reader, but not confuse them. You need to make sure that you foreshadow enough that the reader's like, okay, when they get there, but at the same time, they're not like, yeah? Because I actually had this recently where someone did a super huge plot twist. Again, indie authors. I love the indie authors I work with. I also love all of you guys, but just saying, these are the people I'm working with recently. Since I know you guys are busy. But it actually made me really proud of them because they had done a great job of doing subtle foreshadowing. Then I just said, okay, you gotta have at least 2 obvious foreshadows because I still didn't see it coming even with all the subtleties because it was almost too subtle. In which case it was confusing to the reader because she was like, it's here the whole time. And if you reread it, you're like, oh yeah, it's here the whole time. But the problem is you don't want them to have to do that. You want your reader to be like, oh, not like, okay, put the book down. Pardon? Yeah, you want to make sure, so that's why I say the subtle foreshadows are important, but you also want to make sure you have at least 2 obvious ones, one near the beginning and one near the ending. So that way, with those obvious ones, when the sweep the rug out from under you, instead of being like, I lost my footing, fall on my butt, you're like, I'm ready for this, like in an action movie, and you're the stunt double, and they pull the rug, and you're like, wow, and you land, right? You're surprised, but you land, instead of being completely have the rug swept out from under you. So it's important to make sure that you dabble in that foreshadowing, and you don't have to do it up front either. You can do like her and do subtle foreshadowing and then worry about the more like obvious foreshadowing later. Because that's honestly what most authors do. A lot of authors are like, here's my subtle foreshadowing, and then they're like, ooh, crap, the readers didn't see that coming at all. And so they have to go back and fix it. And that's fine. Don't stress about it, okay? Just make
That's
sure
why we
that...
have editors.
Exactly, this is why we have editing. Plot twists should be surprising, but not confusing, to reiterate. Alright, so, last little bit that we're going to talk about today. With climaxes, you want to make sure that you cover the internal, the external character growth. You want to make sure that plot twists make sense. You also want to avoid Deus Ex Machina. Now, Deus Ex Machina is basically not a plot twist, but it's when the plot is solved by something that seems to come out of nowhere, and not in a positive plot twisty type of way, in just a like, crap, I have to end this novel right now sort of way. This is and this is perfectly normal. Lots of people do Deus Ex Machina. There's a reason there's a term for it, is because it happens all the time. And it's actually quite common. You want to make sure that you avoid Deus Ex Machina. Now, what is Deus Ex Machina? Again, a great example of this would be, funnily enough, Harry Potter's second novel. So with Harry Potter, you know, you have the classic, he gets saved by Fox the Phoenix being like, "Ree!" and coming in and blah, 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 blah. And I won't say too much, but basically Fox the Phoenix fixes everything, right? You only see Fox once in the whole book. Why should he save Harry Potter? Why?
Because his feathers are in his wand.
See, there you go. You have a lot of theories, a lot of people trying to excuse it, a lot of people trying to brush it away, but don't you all wish that she would have said something like that? If she would have said directly, actually, I think his feathers are in your wand, Harry, wouldn't that been like, what? Cool. Instead of having fans who are extra awesome being like, you know, actually, and then J.K. Rowling's like, that's clearly what I meant. But yes, I agree with you. There's a lot of things where fans come up with reasons that I wish she would have put in there herself. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a junior fiction novel, so that's half the problem, is that with junior fiction novels, there does tend to be a tendency to hit Deus Ex Machina. Why? Because you want to make sure it's short and punchy enough that junior fiction kids can actually finish the novel. But that means that you also sometimes have to rush the ending and be like, I'm gonna get there already. So yes, does that happen?
Or leave
Absolutely.
it on the cliffhanger, pick it up on the next book, and
Yes.
be good.
There are ways to fix it. I'm just saying it is a problem that junior fiction authors are prone to. So if you run into yourself doing it, don't feel bad. And hey, clearly it got published and it went through like several professional editors and they all thought that Enigma was fine, so shrugs, you know.
You just need to like bring it to me, and I'll be like super critical. Like, but I love the book. But also fix that and that and that and that just seemed off. And then
There are
I love
things-
it and you're amazing, but also fix it.
You sound like an editor already. But anyway, it's funny though because with Deus Ex Machina, it is common enough that sometimes people don't even see that it's a problem until afterwards, and that's okay. Honestly, editors are human, publishers are human. That's why things like this sneak by, is because of the fact that editors are so busy trying to make sure that they polish it up that every once in a while they'll miss something big. There was actually an editor that recently admitted at a conference I went to, and I thought this was a big admit for her. I was like, dang, I would not want to say that out loud. Good for you. Like, that you have the confidence to say this out loud. Granted, she works for Shadow Mountain, so of course she has the confidence to say this out loud. It's not like she's going to get fired because Shadow Mountain's so fancy. But anyway, and she's one of the head editors there too, so yeah, she didn't get fired anytime soon. Especially not over this, but it was funny nonetheless. It was one of those murder mysteries where it was based off a recipe, you know, the cutesy like blueberry pie and murder kind of thing, you know. And they had a blueberry crumble recipe at the back, and apparently they checked everything in the novel. They were like 99% sure that it was fine, and then they hadn't double checked the recipe as well as they should have. It said 4 cups of salt instead of 4 tablespoons. And some dear old lady actually made it and wrote her a letter and said, "It was a little salty, dear." And she's like, "Oh crap." Like, you poor sweet soul, a little salty? That's like gonna kill you. Like, how did you? Yeah. Yeah, like how would you think that was the actual recipe? I think she said it was specified it was a little old lady, so I'm thinking like in her 80s, it's just like it's a recipe. I'm just gonna follow it, you know, like not really thinking maybe has some sort of dementia, Alzheimer's going on here. Not quite sure how recipes work anymore. I don't know, but she said that she got this sweet letter from this old lady who was saying it was a little too salty. She went and checked the recipe and realized, oh shoot. And so they had to reprint the whole thing, which is an expense for sure, but luckily it is not quite enough to get you fired. If it's one typo, even if it's that bad of a typo. So that being said, that's why a lot of things like Deus Ex Machina end up happening in books, because editors and publishers are people and they're going to make mistakes. However, that being said, that does not mean AI should replace people, because let me tell you, AI makes so many more mistakes. Let me tell you right now. Like,
AI
bro.
You can use AI for other things, but not writing, because that's where all the originality and creativity come in, and that's where you get actual quality stories.
Yes, oh my gosh. And then, I mean, even on top of that, like, I've been, every once in a while, things will pop up on my thing and they'll be like underlined here. No, when you work in Word, it automatically underlines things for you, regardless of if you have a Grammarly or whatever. And there will be things that are underlined and it will be like, this is the wrong word. And I'm like, actually, that is the right word. Shut up. So many times. Yes, Charlie, question.
I think that AI also has, sorry,
That's okay. Statement, question, go on.
hit on AI. Okay. AI, it never makes characters make tough decisions, and if it does, it's like.
Oh no, that's true. It's very much kid's story.
Yeah.
You know, because of terms and conditions, it can't be like.
Super dark. So it can't have the realism. Yes.
Like the first part of Midjourney when it was first released, when you typed in make human or whatever, they looked freaky.
No, it's true. It's true. It's and even with basic grammar, the other day it was saying add a dash here, and it was totally wrong. I was like, you would never add a dash here. That actually makes it make less sense. It actually makes it more confusing. What do you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Also, AI was made by humans, and anything made by humans probably has mistakes. So
Correct.
AI has mistakes.
Excellent. Yes.
Yeah, and there's
Anything.
no emotion in
No.
when AI writes something.
Absolutely
But
not.
it's a robot. It doesn't know how to write emotion because it doesn't have emotion.
Yeah.
That's why humans are better. Shut up, AI.
Yeah, people are using chat AI to make essays, but when they do that, you're just when you read it, it sounds
Like it was written by AI. Yes, exactly. Now, if you want to use it as an idea
Teachers
generator,
are
by all
dumb.
means, but that's as far as I think AI is
But
actually
they
useful.
graduated from college for a reason.
Now, also, I will say, there are times when things like Grammarly or things like that will tell you to add commas or dashes and things like that. Generally, let your editor make those decisions. Don't let Grammarly make those decisions because the editor actually knows what they're doing. Grammarly just thinks it knows what it's doing. It doesn't actually. Anyway, that being said, enough about AI. The point being that with Deus Ex Machina, the best way to avoid it, I would say, is just make sure that you properly foreshadow even if you don't know it's coming in the beginning. So like if you have no idea what's happening and then you get to the ending and you're like, oh, that was such a cool ending. Even if you have to go back and foreshadow it more, that's okay. Brandon Sanderson actually does this. He said that because of the fact that he doesn't plot things out beforehand, he will write the ending and then go, ah, crap, now I have to go in and back, I got a bunch of foreshadow. And that's okay.
And take a look at how freaking amazing
Exactly.
his books are.
There's a reason they're good, and it's because of the fact that he goes back and re-adds the foreshadowing. Well, there's that. No one can write that much and not be some sort of flavor of magical wizard. Anyway.
the frugal wizard guy, I'm pretty sure it's just like, yeah, no, guy from medieval Europe written by a wizard.
Oh, yes. But yeah, so with Deus Ex Machina, just make sure if you have an ending that you reread your whole novel and make sure that that ending is well foreshadowed. And if it's not, just feel free to flush it out. Add it in. Little click here, click there, snips it all up. Exactly. Type it up, just sync it all up. And if you have continuity errors, that's okay. Again, this is what an editor's for.
Humans be humans. It's
So
fine.
it's okay. Like, feel free to add in as much foreshadowing as you want. And if later they're like, by the way, this conversation doesn't make sense because you kind of just stuffed it in there, that's okay. Fix it later.
Like, okay, chop, you're done.
Exactly. Don't worry about it till later. All right. Do you guys have any other questions about how to write a good climax for your novel? If not, that's fine. I can just turn the video off and we can talk about any other questions you might have. Okay, seems good. A reminder again, we have a first chapter contest. All entries are due on the 30th. If you are interested in entering, please make sure to grab an entry form on your way out. They're all on this front desk out here. I'm upstairs right now for the reference of people on the video. Make sure to grab one. If you're interested, we also even have grading sheets that you can look at to see what we will be grading on. Unfortunately, you do not get to judge, but you can take the grading sheet and use it to figure out what we're going to be judging and grading on if you want to make extra sure that it's nice and polished before you turn it in. But honestly, I've only had a few people turn it in short chapters, so please, by all means, even if it's not perfectly polished, first chapter, please give it your best shot. I'd love to see what you can do. The best part about this is that there is no qualifiers. It's just straight up, is your first chapter the best first chapter? Does it make me want to keep reading? Does it make me interested? There is a word count, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
What I meant is there's no
Makes sense.
official prompt, as in like, you have to have an emerald in it or whatever. Yes.
What time is it?
It is 4:19.
You
As
can
far
put
as
the
the
word skeleton, waterfall, and rubber duck in the
And
same
rubber
chapter.
duck.
Then
Oh my gosh.
congratulations.
Whew. Anyway, so with the first chapter contest, it is shorter than the last contest, unfortunately, because of the fact that my coworkers said that they could not read 6,000 words. I'm sorry. So I made it 15,000 minimum to 1,500 minimum. I can words. That made no sense. 1,500 word minimum, just to make sure that you have as solid as chapter as you can, and then 3,000 word maximum. Even if that means you have to cut it off, just make sure you don't cut it off in the middle of a sentence. And it does have a genuine ending, even if it's a cliffhanger. Alright, that being said, again, please, I would love to have you all enter. I've only gotten like 2 entries so far, so I'd love to have at least 5 more just to make it a competition, just to make it a little spicy, to see who's gonna win, you know? Alright, so
Stay up tonight doing homework.
thank you guys.